Hopefully you can hear me. I'm using a different device. This is kind of a placeholder video. I do have other videos coming up that are not so Christian related, but I just need a placeholder video. So I do want to do Mere Christianity because this book was awesome. I want to talk about that. I am going to do the Jordan Peterson stuff, Beyond Order. I read this one. I'm going to compare all three. 12 Rules for Life, Beyond Order, and Maps of Meaning. I read all three of them. So I'm going to compare all three of them in one shot because, I do like Jordan Peterson. Alisa Childers, who I was confused with Ali Beth Stuckey for some reason, came up with a video called 5 Questions Every Apologist Should Answer. But basically it's like 5 questions every Christian should know, right? But in this video, let's check out these questions, shall we?
Every Christian is called to be prepared to make a defense for what we believe. And the word that's used here, translated into English as defense, is the Greek word apologia. And this is where we get our English word apologetics. Apologetics just means giving a reason for what you believe.
Actually, apologia means a defense. It's a defense. It's not a reason for what you believe. It just means a defense. That's why Plato's work, Socrates' trial, is called the Apology.
And when it comes to the realm of Christian apologetics, this can span a lot of different disciplines like science, logic, philosophy, and history. Christian apologetics basically has 2 goals. Number 1, to provide reasons why Christianity is true, and number 2, to communicate those reasons to the world. Today we're going to talk through 5 basic apologetics questions that I think every Christian should be prepared to answer. So number 1, have the New Testament documents been corrupted?
I'm going to skip her answers and just give mine. So have the New Testament documents been corrupted? So I might do a second placeholder video as well, responding to a Islamic apologist who has been talking on my channel in my comments. It's not really atheists who hit this one very hard. It's actually more Islamic apologists, Dawa people. Sometimes Tawhid, but mostly Dawa people. Has the Bible been corrupted? The short answer is no. The longer answer is depends what you mean by corruption. If you mean do we have originals, autographs of the 4 Gospels and the letters, the epistles? No, we don't. Do we have reasonable telemetry from who first said the story, from what tradition they rose from, to it being written down? No, we don't. But we do have really good records for once they were written down, what exists. So when it comes to the written word, yeah, we're really, really certain about what was said. We were really comfortable with what was written. There is not a lot of question there. We all know that it was written in Greek. We all know that Jesus spoke Aramaic. All Christians know this from the beginning, so it's not really a question of any of that. Although people who are not religious do tend to get caught up on that. The bigger stumbling blocks to Christianity are the key facts that are historically accurate. So Jesus being crucified is a much bigger deal, much bigger obstacle, much bigger stumbling block than the existence or non-existence of autographs of the original Gospels, or tracking the tradition down before it becomes Catholic, because it's Catholic tradition that makes the Gospels survive. So when you try to get to pre-Catholic sources, you end up hitting a wall because there's nothing there. That doesn't mean that there can't be. It just means there is nothing there. The only un-Catholic sources that you can find for the Bible would be stuff like the pseudepigrapha, or the apocryphal works. So, like the Apocalypse of Peter or the Sayings of Thomas, you're not really going to get anything, and you know, you're not going to get that from the Bible. The Bible actually is really reliable when it comes to documents when you compare it to other ancient documents. Does that mean anything? No, it just, that's what it is. It's a question of faith. So have the documents been corrupted? No. Have they been updated to fit the audience they were speaking to? Yes. Every translation is an update. Every time you translate the Bible into a new language, you're updating it. You're changing something. Every time you compile a Bible and you have 22 books, 27 books, it doesn't matter. Whatever version of your Bible that you have, whether it's Orthodox or Protestant, that's a change. Anytime you see those little numbers that you use for, you know, 1 Corinthians or John 2 verse 12, that's not in the original text. Those are additions, those are changes. But they're important changes that help you track the book. So let's continue.
Well, obviously, when the New Testament was being written, we didn't have a printing press, so each manuscript had to be copied by hand. And when the original documents no longer exist, scholars use a science called textual criticism to...
But there is an interesting thing with scribal errors. So a really common scribal error, other than misspelling, because misspelling is actually, when people say there's like 30,000 or 40,000 mistakes in the Bible or something like that, or just the New Testament alone, they're talking about spelling mistakes. They're talking about punctuation mistakes, spelling mistakes, accent mistakes. They're not talking about the actual meaning of the text. When you're talking about actual mistakes in the text, it's actually really simple. And I'm dyslexic, so I know this very well. You're writing and your eye skips a line, and suddenly you're writing another line. Because there's multiple copies, because there's multiple versions, because there's multiple scribes, you can just see what was supposed to be said. It's not hard to figure out.
Reconstruct the wording of ancient texts. When they have a lot of manuscripts and early manuscripts, they can do this with a great deal of accuracy.
So that's not actually what textual criticism does. What you want to do is, and I know it's for her, it's a bad word, which is deconstruction, but you want to go back to find the original meaning and to see what the original text actually said before the additions. So textual criticism is going to be kind of a method to see what the text actually says and what the text actually means in its original context, not theological or philosophical endeavors to find its meaning. You know, we're looking for what it actually says, what the original context of it was, and what the original wording was, not the theological meaning, that'd be theology.
New Testament documents have more manuscripts and earlier manuscripts to support their accuracy than any work of ancient classical literature. In fact, most scholars agree that the New Testament has been copied with an unprecedented high level of accuracy. There's really just a...
Actually, scholars don't say that, but okay.
Very small percentage of variations between the manuscripts that affect the meaning of the text. And among those, there isn't one that calls into question any cardinal Christian doctrine.
That's not true either. There are some interesting changes, like when it comes to Jesus' crucifixion and Jesus' baptism, there's some major wording differences in some versions.
If you want to learn more about textual criticism and the transmission of the New Testament documents, I highly recommend a book called Myths and Mistakes in New Testament Textual Criticism by Peter Gurry and Elijah Hickson. You can all...
I highly recommend the academic works, not the public or the for mass consumption works of Bart Ehrman, and listen to his great courses and Great Courses Plus, also other biblical scholars going through it in a academic point of view, not a theological point of view, to see how actual academics actually talk about the Bible. You get a very different perspective than from the theological. And the theological approach is important too. You will go to a college and get a doctorate in theology or philosophy. You can do philosophy of religion, you can do theology of whatever. But when it comes to textual criticism, that is a historical endeavor, something that historians do, not a theological endeavor.
Question number 2. Is there any evidence that the resurrection of Jesus actually happened?
Again, let me answer first. Is there any evidence of the resurrection? Well, there's evidence of the crucifixion, yes. Is there evidence of the resurrection? Depends what you mean by evidence. Do you mean, is there testimony? Sure. But if you don't believe the people speaking, that testimony is not going to be worth anything. I can tell you amazing things that I did in my 20s. If you don't believe I did them, or if you don't think I'm a trustworthy source, me telling the truth doesn't help. So, can it be true, and can the sources be authoritative and yet it not be valuable to the listener? Yeah, because it depends on who you consider your authority. So if you're an atheist or if you're a Muslim, then the Christian sources aren't going to really do any good because they're Christian sources. There's built-in bias. As a Christian, I don't have that problem. That's because I'm biased.
So, esteemed historian and New Testament scholar Gary Habermas collected over 1,400 of the most critical scholarly works written between 1975 and 2003 about the resurrection of Jesus. These works ranged from the ultra-liberal to the far-right conservative, and he discovered that virtually every scholar agreed on several points surrounding the resurrection of Jesus.
I mean, look, I believe in the resurrection. I would love to tell you that academic scholars agree that the resurrection happened. That's not what you can't prove. You can't prove that through looking at history. Even if it's true, you can only prove probability through history. You can't prove actual events. So if something amazing happened, even if it absolutely really did happen, because of the way that history works as a pseudoscience, because it's not a hard science, you're never going to be able to prove with 100% accuracy that something happened, even if you have video proof, because you can say it was faked. You have extreme skeptics. You have these ultra skeptics who there's no level of proof that unless they're physically there, they believe it. Even if they're physically there, they're going to say, well, how do you know I wasn't high? Or how do you know that I wasn't having some kind of like weird thing? So you're not, they're going to say they had a mental issue, not that they saw something impossible happen. So yeah, you can't solve extreme skepticism with a million apologetic works. You can't solve skepticism with a million testimonies saying that something happened. Even if you get every single human on earth but the one non-believer to agree that a thing happened, that one guy who's a skeptic about it won't believe just because all these people said it happened. That's not how it works. They have to believe the person that they're listening to, and they have to believe that it, in the realm of their understanding of the universe, this is how things work. So you have a lot of groundwork to do and a lot of space to cover. You can't just be like, well, the Bible says it's true.
Here are 4 of them. Number 1, that Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. Number 2, that Jesus' disciples believed he rose from the dead and appeared to them and were willing to suffer and die for these beliefs.
Yeah, so historians and academics do agree that Jesus was real, that Jesus died, that he was crucified, and they do also agree that followers of his did attest to seeing him after his death. But they're saying that they attest that these people said this. They're not attesting that it's true. They're saying that they said it.
Number 3, that the church persecutor Paul suddenly became a Christian after having an experience that he believed was the risen Jesus. Number 4, the brother of Jesus.
She keeps on brushing over the people believed or he believed part.
And famously skeptical James was suddenly converted after he believed he had seen the risen Jesus. Habermas also noted that somewhere around 75% of scholars also agree that Jesus' tomb was found empty. The best explanation of these minimal facts is that Jesus was, in fact, resurrected from the dead.
A big problem with what she did there She didn't give any evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. She gave, I don't even know what to say. She gave references to non-named academics who are real, like Bart Ehrman, or I'm trying to think of someone else who would be a good example. But she's referencing non-named sources and saying they agree that Jesus was killed and that his followers said he was alive, that they saw him after he died. That's not proof of a resurrection. That's proof that people say that said something, that they said something, or that maybe you could somehow, if you're okay with mind reading, say that, okay, I can say that I with confidence that they really believe this. That's fine, but a belief is not on its own proof. So you have to say, well, the resurrection is a matter of faith. It's a stumbling block for the non-believers. It's not a stumbling block for the believer. That's the point. Go read academic works. If you want to convince an atheist of anything, go read some academic works. For real.
This brings us to question number 3. Has science disproved God? Scientists study the material world.
Wait, one answer first. Has science disproved God? No, science can't prove or disprove God. That's not how science works. You can't prove God. You can't prove him. You can't disprove him. Either you believe in him or you don't. If he's real and you believe in him, good. If he's not, then it doesn't make a difference. If you believe in him and he's real, that's the important thing. The important thing is that God is real and that you have faith in him and you worship him. The act of belief is actually not even important in the realm of religion until you get to Judaism and Christianity. For a long time, most ancient religions were actually based on action, not based on belief. So it was ritual. You can see this in the Old Testament itself. There is a point in the Bible where it is actually ritual-based. There's a ritual-based religion that's being practiced. It isn't until you get, I think, somewhere either toward the Babylonian conquest or just after, just post-Babylonian conquest, where you really get the theological, the belief as the important part, not the ritual, where they start saying things like in Psalms where God isn't requiring a sacrifice of an animal. God's requiring a contrite and humble heart and prayer. So it changes from ritual to belief. You can actually see that process in the Bible.
By definition, God is not material. In fact, the statement, God does not exist, is not actually a statement of science. It's a philosophical statement. It can't be proven in a lab. So in order for scientists to assert that God does...
To say that philosophy can't be proven is discounting the fact that science was once a philosophy. Also, before that, it was a religion. So yeah, same thing with mathematics. So she doesn't know what she's talking about. There are philosophical concepts that can be proven. There are also mathematical concepts that cannot be proven. So she's diving and dipping her finger into a well that she does not understand.
Not exist, they have to filter their evidence through the philosophical lens of materialism, which excludes the possibility of anything outside the material realm. Frank Turek offers this illustration in his book, Stealing from God. Quote, to say that a scientist can disprove the existence of God is like saying a mechanic can disprove the existence of Henry Ford. It doesn't follow.
Again, don't read a theological or apologetic book. Go read an academic book that concerns actual history, or study philosophy, or read the Bible and then read the Church Fathers. But don't worry about what she's recommending. It's all crap. Read the Bible. Read the Bible, read the Church Fathers, go read a science book. Go get an actual book that says science, current, maybe from Macmillan, maybe from, I think, Hill House or something like that. Go get an actual textbook that says science. Read that. Or history book.
You can also check out reasons.org and discuss...
McGraw-Hill.
slavery.org. Question number 4. Does the Bible condone slavery? When America instituted the Hebrew...
Yes, yes, the Bible does condone slavery at some points, but because it is a book about the evolution of faith of the Jewish people, eventually slavery is seen theologically as not being okay. But it takes a long time to get there. It's a long time before you get to Jesus and Paul, and you get to the idea that there is no slave or free, there is no Greek or Jew or Gentile or Roman. It's all just one mishposh of people. It takes a long time to get there. Okay, so there are parts of the Bible that can be used to support slavery, just like there are parts of the Bible that can be used to say that slavery is the worst thing in the world.
Word ebed, which is often translated as slave in English, did not carry the same negative connotation it does in our modern context. So in ancient Israel,
saying a Hebrew or Greek word does not make you smart.
this type of servanthood was a system in which a destitute person could voluntarily work to pay off a debt. Although it wasn't a...
Someone who's read Epictetus, it doesn't matter when slavery was, it doesn't matter whether it was chattel slavery, which was like maybe the worst form of slavery in history, or if it was just basic slavery or indentured servitude. Ask a slave from any time period who was literate and able to write or lettered. It was a bad situation. It wasn't good.
Perfect system. They were given food and shelter, legal rights, and protection from physical mistreatment. After 7 years, they were released from their debt and servitude and given a generous gift of flocks and wine and grain. In some cases, the Israelites kept servants from surrounding nations as a result of war, but they were commanded to treat them humanely, and those servants were also protected from mistreatment under biblical law. In fact, human trafficking was punishable by death in the Old Testament. Now, the type of slavery that was sanctioned by the Roman Empire in the New Testament context was a bit different than the type of system God instituted for Israel in the Old Testament.
Does she even realize the fact that she just said that God instituted a type of slavery? I just said that the Bible does allow for slavery. Even if she wants to say the same thing, she just said, after trying to discount it, saying that no, it's not the same thing, then she contradicted herself and said that God instituted a type of slavery. Another way to look at it is that we're all slaves of God. Or a really good interpretation that I've seen in a church father that I can't remember off the top of my head which church father, but it's a really cool one, is that the word slave is a good metaphor for the soul, because the soul is the slave of your mind or of your body, and you want your soul to be healed, because the centurion goes to Jesus and says, could you heal my slave? I'm not worthy for you to enter under my roof. If you just simply say he's healed, he's healed. And Jesus says, well, hey, you believe, so by faith you are healed. By faith your servant is healed. By faith your soul is healed. The soul is the slave and is a metaphor for the soul. So you can use it that way. But that's still that's still slavery. That means that your soul wants to be good, but your body wants to sin, and it's in conflict. Okay.
But it's interesting to note that nowhere in the New Testament is this type of slavery condoned. In fact, anywhere from 85 to 90% of the Roman population were slaves, and encouraging slaves to rebel against their masters would have meant execution or branding. Instead, the Apostle Paul taught that slaves were on equal terms with free people in the eyes of God, and encouraged change beginning in hearts. This radically countercultural teaching began to play out in history and would eventually inspire people like...
That completely discounts the fact that in the Old Testament, in the books that were written probably after the Babylonian exile, the Jews, in their ideas of their proto-history, are slaves in Egypt. So, and that it was seen as a bad thing. So you can go back to the earliest parts of the Bible and still find anti-slavery rhetoric and pro-liberation rhetoric. So again,
John Wesley and William Wilberforce to oppose modern.
She's talking herself into a tangle when she doesn't have to.
This brings us to question number 5. Is there any evidence outside the Bible that Jesus actually existed?
She's going to probably do what everybody does, which I've done myself, which is reference Tactius, Josephus, and someone else that's actually a really good source. I want to say Philo, but I don't think it's Philo. The problem is that a lot of those references are dubious as they have been altered. The original version is findable. It's not as if you can't do the work to figure out what it originally said, and the original reference is there. So there is a reference to Christ, but it's not as detailed as the one that survives. But even if you discount the fact that there have been some alterations to the lettering or the sentence or the spelling, even if that doesn't matter to you, you're like, hey, well, this ancient author did write about this, about Jesus. It's not as simple as that. All of our sources go back to the medieval period. Yes, these are books that are written at the time of Jesus or written right after the time of Jesus in ancient Rome. But the first surviving documents are going to be in the medieval period because, like she said earlier, which hurts her point she's trying to make now, the Bible, the Bible texts go back to the time of Jesus, go back to like maybe 60 years after the death of Jesus. You have physical text, whether it's a small piece or a line. You have biblical text going back then, and you have Bible text, Hebrew text going back before then that you can find scraps of. You can find references in ancient Egypt, in I think early kingdom or late kingdom. You can see steles with references to the Hebrews. So it's not as if you can't find this stuff in history. You can. But the written stuff that she wants to reference doesn't start showing up until the medieval time period, even though it was written at the correct time period. The first evidence of it is in the medieval period, so we don't know exactly what the original said, which is a problem if you're trying to use it as a source for proof. It's not a problem if you're trying to use it as a spiritual guide and signpost for someone who already believes that, hey, look, here are some other ancient authors who talked about Jesus. Yeah, they did. But what they talked about was not Jesus himself, it was about his followers. They mentioned Christians doing things. They mentioned specifically Christian Mass and because the Christians at the time were Catholic, they mentioned specifically the Eucharist, communion. And they're freaked out by it because, they think Christians are eating the flesh of their God. So they want to know, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with these Christians? Do we send them to trial? What do we do? That's what it is. It's not a detailed explanation of Jesus. It's just a quick one-line reference, two-line reference. It says, hey, there's this group called the Christians. They worship a guy named Christ, and they think that he's their God, and they won't worship the other gods. What do we do about them? It's not a very deep philosophical, theological reference. It's very brief. I wish there were deep theological stuff there, but there's not. Even Josephus, there's not a lot of reference there. Now there are some references in the Talmud to Jesus, again, but these are references that come much later. It's not in the first 100-year period of Jesus, but there are references in the Talmud that do specifically reference Jesus, but they're not good references. They're not speaking highly of Jesus. They're saying they're speaking about Jesus, and they speak about Paul, and they speak about him in a very negative way, and it's also very quick. It's just a one line, that guy. So you're not getting what she's going to try to say here as proof. What you're actually getting is you're getting an understanding that there are basic facts about Jesus that we can agree upon, which is he was born. He was from Nazareth. He preached in the Palestinian area. He eventually was crucified by Pontius Pilate, and he died. Those are the only points that all outside extenuous biblical sources agree on. That's it.
So this claim tends to make the rounds on social media from time to time, but the answer is really quite simple. There are 10 non-Christian sources that mention Jesus as an actual person within 150 years of his life.
They mention Christians, not Jesus.
He's mentioned by Josephus, Tacitus.
The Josephus quotes are tenuous at best, and again, there's a problem that some scribe in the medieval period, which is the earliest versions of Josephus that survive, changed some of the wording, and that hurts the credibility of the quote. Even though I believe the quote is real, an atheist can very quickly point to that scribal change and be like, hey, someone changed it. We don't know what it said.
Pliny the Younger.
I believe Pliny the Elder it was the one I was talking about where he was just asking, hey, what do we do about these Christians? He wasn't referencing Jesus. He was asking, what do we do about these people you call Christians, or we call Christians?
Thales, Suetonius, Lucian, Celsus, Marabar Serapion, and the Jewish Talmud. Now, this does not include the abundance of Christian historical witnesses who wrote about him, including the...
Most of the Christian historical witnesses who wrote about him are Gospels that have been rejected because they're Gnostic or pseudepigraphal. I wouldn't use them as references for proof of Jesus. The church fathers do reference, the apostolic fathers do reference Jesus, but they're believers. So even though I trust them, it is a biased source.
I'm also going to link to an
Again, testimony alone is not evidence of something. It's only evidence that someone believes something. But it's not physical. It's just probable. So through probability, based on testimony, we can say what most likely is true, not what actually is true. So even though I believe Jesus is real and true and the Son of God and God incarnate, I believe in the Trinity. Me saying that I believe and me doing this right here as proof that someone can one day look back and say, hey, this person believed that, only proves that I believe it. And even more so, it only proves that I said I believe it. See the problem? Alisa?
View on Mike Winger's YouTube page where he interviews historian Mike Lacona.
And I have a lot of problems with Mike Winger. He's not don't go to Mike Winger for information or for proof of anything.
And that's called Real Historian Responds to Jesus Was a Myth Claims. So I hope this video has helped equip you and give you a bit of a bird's eye view into what it might look like for you to begin to...
Her questions were good, her answers were terrible. I don't know if my answers were any better, but any atheist watching this, please feel free to respond. Any Christian watching this, give me your answers to these questions, not her answers, your answers, how you would answer these. Peace, like, and subscribe. Talk to you all later.